And we are just delighted that Tom is presenting today, and we are not alone. We are approaching 250 registrants for this webinar. And I want to thank Dr. Beckley very much, as well as our team here at CCNB for making this event happen. Beverly Gingra, Kyle Reed, Danielle Smith, Michelle Pellerin, and Aaron Sharp. Thanks for being such a great team to work with. And so without any further ado, I would like to turn this over to Dr. Tom Beckley. And there we go. Thank you.
Okay, we're seeing my slides. All right.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Marika. I appreciate being asked to be part of this. My two colleagues that are also presenting in this series, I consider to be very esteemed and way smarter than me. So I'm happy to be in that crowd. All right, I'll get right to it. There we go. I don't need to linger on the first slide because the title is the outline. New Brunswick Forest, what it was, what it is, what it could be, and what it should be. At the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about what my partner and I are doing on our woodlot. It's kind of like a bit of an answer as to what the could and the should, what we're trying to accomplish there. And then I am looking forward to the question period and comment period and conversation period at the end. Now, the thing that I want to point out at the very front end of this is that these four questions are variable. The first three are answerable by science. What the forest was, what the forest is, what the forest could be. Like that's modeling, and we do a lot of that in our faculty, not me, but others. But the fourth question, as a sociologist, is the most interesting to me, what the forest should be. And that's a values question. There's no right answers to that question, but there's a wide variety of opinion and then differential access to power and persuasion and so forth. But ultimately, it comes down to being an ethical question and more in the domain of social science. Now, so just disclosure, disclaimers, I'm not a forester, although sometimes I dress up like one. I'm not a forest modeler. I'm not a historian. I'm not a paleoecologist. So you might ask, and I've asked myself, what gives me the qualifications to talk about this topic? I am a longtime observer and occasional contributor to these debates and discussions. I've been at UNB since the year 2000 and in New Brunswick since 1998, keenly watching this debate over Crown land and the entire forest, actually, and what it is and how we choose collectively to manage it, steward it, etc. I'd like to give a shout out and kind of dedicate this talk to Bill Parento. He was a forest history professor, passed away a couple of years ago. He's a dear friend, and we used to love having conversations about these four questions. And then just before we leave this slide, just want to draw your attention to that particular load of wood. That we'll come back to that later in the presentation. So this is a diagram that I started as part of my dissertation way back in 1994, but I've been adding a little bit to it, mostly things on the bottom line there. It's a Venn diagram because a lot of these things overlap, but I tried to make a bit of a mind map for all of the different things that we use and enjoy forests for. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, but it does sort of give range of the different types of things and where some things are overlapping with other categories. So I'll come back to this as well, but keep this in mind that this is like an attempt to come to the full suite of activities for which we value and love forests. Now I should apologize to Cindy because she's gonna talk about something else in 2 weeks, but for me, and today we're going to mostly be talking about trees. I maintain that trees are the main thing about forests. There is all those other components: wildlife, soil life, hydrology, understory, plants and shrubs. I was going to say that Mycorrhiza is having a moment in the sun, but it's not really because it's mostly underground. But these components of trees I want to talk about are age, the species, forest composition, natural disturbances that affect those other elements, and some anthropogenic drivers as well. Because these factors drive so much else about forests. Um, so, in the Wabanaki Acadian forest, which is what I will call it today, there are some species that live extremely long times. Others, like balsam fir, balsam poplar, much, much less so. Part of the story is going to be the transition from long-lived trees to less long-lived trees. We have about 32 species endemic to the Wabanaki Acadian forest, different abundance, different distributions over time, and different assemblages too, like the degree of mixed species forest versus forests with a simpler composition. We often talk about and hear about monocultures, but that's a little bit of a dangerous word to throw around, I think, at times. Oftentimes we simplify forest composition into hardwood, softwood, and mixed wood stands. And again, we'll talk about natural disturbance. And then the things that we've done as humans, particularly in the post-settlement era, in terms of harvesting, clearing, planting, climate change, and fire as drivers, and they kind of frame what's possible, I guess, for that future forest condition. So you can see New Brunswick is right in the middle of this, what we used to call the Acadian forest in Canada. New Englanders called it the New England Acadian forest. In the article that I'm mostly drawing from for this talk, we called it the New England Acadian forest. And then very shortly after that, the convention became to call it the Wabanaki Acadian forest. And so that's what I'm going to call it today. There are a couple of little boreal pockets in the north, but for the most part, all of New Brunswick is in this kind of temperate transition zone between boreal and temperate forests of southern New England and the mid-coast states. Now, a lot of the material for this talk comes from this paper that I co-authored with Josh Noseworthy. Many of you know Josh, and I want to give a shout out to him. He did the heavy lifting on this paper. I was kind of the instigator of the paper, but he had the ecological chops to actually bring it to fruition. So he's somewhere in the world right now. He's a globetrotting conservation planner and consultant. Maybe he found us today. Maybe he's here today. I don't know. There's an interesting backstory to this paper. We were going to write a paper about why we wrote the paper, but then Joan Baxter, who many of you may know, wrote a great article in the Halifax Examiner about what precipitated us writing this paper, and particularly for me, who, like I said before, kind of had no business writing a paper on historical ecology of forests in the region. Essentially, what we did was an exhaustive literature review. I don't expect anybody to be able to read this, but we did collect over 100 articles that in one way or another allowed us to make a determination on this question of what, has the Wabanaki Acadian forest taken on more of a boreal nature over time through human interventions. So what the New Brunswick forest was, well, that depends. It depends upon how far back you go in time. I looked it up, and in the Carboniferous period, we were 10 degrees above the equator and very likely a tropical forest. As recently as 12 or 13,000 years ago, we were under ice, and slightly less time than that. Between the ice and the forest, there was likely a tundra for a period of years. So the geography that's New Brunswick has been a lot of different things. Nature's constantly changing. We get very attached to particular landscapes and particular forms, that we experience during a human lifetime. But oftentimes, just to make a point, when I'm talking to students about ecological restoration, I just tell them, well, I'm a gravel pit operator, so I want to do ecological restoration to 9,000 years ago when there were no trees. There wasn't much overburden, as they call it, and gravel pit operators were just free to play. So again, more recently in time, pre-European settlement, indigenous people of this land that Marika graciously acknowledged lived here. And compared to some other places in North America, the footprint of the Wabanaki existence on this land was fairly light. Not a lot of use of fire, smaller amount of agriculture than in many other places in North America. And so really no evidence of sort of large scale change to the landscape by indigenous peoples. Basically, they lived within what nature provided in a sustainable manner. The forests that settlers from Europe first came to know and understand were dominated by beech, sugar maple, yellow birch, eastern hemlock, red spruce, and eastern white cedar, a bit of white pine, white ash, red oak. Balsam fir was less of a feature. And again, there was small pockets of boreal forest. Again, some of these papers are kind of not New Brunswick specific, but discuss the region as a whole. Not long after settlement, Prince Edward Island, given the moderate climate and so forth, was largely cleared for agriculture. Similar situation in Maine. We didn't really find statistics for this in New Brunswick, but quite a bit, way more cleared land than exists today. Like perhaps where this conversion was most noticed and still has a legacy today is in the Upper St. John Valley, the rich Acadian hardwood country that where the potato industry thrives now because of that rich calcareous soil that's there. So overall, in this investigation around the change in forest composition and tree species over this period of human settlement after the Europeans arrived, we found declines in these species. And again, all supported by the literature. We didn't do any original literature in this, just compiling what was there, what was already published. And the species that were increasing were things like balsam fir, white birch, various poplars, and red maple. Sugar maple is the only one on this list that really is one of those extremely long-lived trees. Again, there's some controversy and discussion. We'll never really be able to know, but I think it's generally understood that the primary disturbance pattern in this forest was kind of a small gap or single tree dynamics. Tolerant hardwood species would basically sit in the sapling phase in the shade, and when one of these trees would pull over from wind or lightning strike or what have you, it would allow the opportunity for those younger trees to catch a little sunlight and reach for the sky. A lot of the trees, again, were dominated at this time by long-lived species that could live 300 to 400 years. Kind of a late successional situation going on, resulting in this kind of pit and mound topography that oftentimes you see in old forests. So I want to correct a little bit of mythology. I mean, I think some people have the impression that, from coast to coast to coast, New Brunswick was this beautiful 300 or 400-year old growth forest everywhere and all the time. I don't think that's actually true. Certainly there was more of this. And some of the estimates in those papers we reviewed suggested up to from 60 to 85% was essentially old forest. Like the number that we most frequently came across for how much of that type of forest is left today was 3%. But again, doing this kind of historical analysis, it's a little bit tricky. It's a little bit hard to be exact. But those species that I list on the upper right-hand corner of this slide were definitely were those ones that experienced a decline. And the photos on the bottom, there used to be a lot more trees in a size category similar to the the historic photo on the left compared to the two trucks in the middle and on the right. Okay, so what the New Brunswick forest is? Well, you can see from the map there of forest cover that we have an awful lot of forest. The pink is non-forest, um, and the brown, which barely shows up, is wetland, but you see a bit of that near the Acadian Peninsula, those peat bogs and so forth. The print on this slide in terms of the species is a little bit hard to read, but this is essentially the same information in a slightly different format. And you can see red, black, and white spruce, balsam fir, jack pine make up a majority of the forest. There's the reddish and pink colors are other conifer species, but overall 64% of the forest is softwood and 36% is made up of hardwood species. Now, we're also interested in like how those tree species are distributed. You know, do they exist in monoculture stands? That's true in some cases. Like in certain environments, eastern white cedar might outcompete everything else, or black spruce. You know, wet sites, that typically happens. But oftentimes, you know, we have some mixed stands as well, and that was one of the things that we documented in that paper was the reduction in the overall land that was in mixed stands into more bifurcated into more softwood stands and hardwood stands. So currently we have about 50% of the land base in softwood, 28% in hardwood, and 22% mixed. We're also interested in forest age. We came up with a term for a paper called infantization, where essentially we're not letting our forests grow to be very old these days. You can see all those categories of regenerating, sapling, young, and immature. Again, making up by, you know, the majority. And so like all of that implies to me that you're not harvesting that forest. It's not of an age that it's has much commercial value. So we have 29% in mature and 7% in this category called overmature. I'm a little bit shocked that we still use that terminology of overmature. I talk with my students about this, like, you know, what the language of forestry and the language of resource management, and certain things imply, to me, overmature implies it's not good and some action need to be taken. But I submit to you Jean Beckley, my mother, age 91, and I asked my students this too. Would you ever call your grandmother overmature? Jean Beckley is just fine. No action need be taken with her. So what did we discover overall on this journey looking at the historic and the contemporary forest? Well, as I've already implied, on the whole, it is younger. It's a whole lot younger. You know, given the amount of the forest that we kind of dedicate to economic activity and historically have, our rotation ages are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The species we choose are are less long-lived species. And, you know, when I first came to UNB, I heard, you know, 40 to 60-year rotations. Now I think with improved genetics and more effective reduction of competition and so forth, that rotation age is even reduced to 35 to 40 years at times. Again, there's very, very little old growth remaining where that used to be the dominant type of forest that we had. And also, again, that phenomenon we call bifurcation of less mixed species forest. So more stands that are either purely hardwood or purely softwood, and less that are mixed. It was really difficult. We really couldn't put hard numbers to and percentages to these things, but it was pretty clear the directions of the trends. One of the things that surprised us, or surprised me anyway, in this was I kind of assumed that this phenomenon of borealization was mostly a contemporary thing, you know, due to clear cutting, plantations. silvicultural practices where either pre-commercial thinning or spraying, where you're aggressively trying to eliminate one type of tree, like intolerant hardwood trees, um, in favor of conifers, which is what the mills prefer. But the thing that I discovered in doing this exercise was how long this process of borealization has been going on, and that the land clearing and then reforestation into early successional species was a huge part of it as well. And also historic fire, whether that was anthropogenic or natural fires. But that transition has been it's not a phenomenon exclusively of the last, say, 60 or 70 years. So this is a little bit of what the forest is and what it looks like today. This is from a helicopter in Black Brook. You can see exclusively hardwood and exclusively conifer trees, and on the left-hand side, a little bit of a mix. Anybody who's been up in the air in New Brunswick, these images will look familiar. That's a little bit of what it looks like on the ground. There's also, this is a hardwood managed site from A.B. Nakawik. We visited on one of our fall field camps. Really quite a lovely forest, which is also generating revenue. But clear cutting is the order of the day, most places. And just, don't forget that we do have beautiful mixed species forest. This is a Nature Trust preserve near Scotch Lake. Okay, what the forest could be. I love this quote from Mark Carney from his famous speech of a couple of weeks ago. Wishing about the old rules-based order that we used to have. I think the same is a little bit true with wishing what the forest could be. He said, nostalgia is not a strategy. And so I think there are romantic notions about, if we could just turn the clock back and have that beautiful pre-European settler society, Wabanaki Acadian forest, we would just love that. We can't really get there for a whole bunch of reasons. First of all, moisture and temperature regimes are different due to climate change. So the message there is a little bit, you can't go home again, or at least not for maybe a few tens or hundreds of thousands of years. The disturbance regimes are changing as well. So we've had major wind events, possibly larger than ones that we experienced in the past. So even like places in Nova Scotia that are experimenting with ecological forestry, it's an open question whether the forest will be able to withstand the hurricane pressure that's only going to increase in frequency and intensity and so forth. We also have what I call these boutique diseases and pests. Every species seems to have its own problem, whether it's emerald ash borer, brown spruce longhorse beetle, hemlock woolly adelgid. It's trying times in terms of keeping all of these different tree species healthy. In our global economy, we move a lot of organisms around that ultimately do us some damage. So there's much more unpredictability, and it's important to remember that forest management has these really, really long timelines. Now, the publication in the upper right corner there, Management Alternatives for New Brunswick's Public Forest, that was a report commissioned by the government and written by Dr. Tom Ertl, my colleague here, and Chris Ward, who until recently was ADM at DNR, but he was a student at the time. And so this was, an early attempt to kind of use computer simulations to imagine what the future forest could be. They looked at a whole range of variables: wood supply, protected areas, conservation forests, the amount of old forest. And I remember Tom telling me that, with this many variables and measuring these at different amounts on the landscape or different levels of intensity, he said their first runs, I think they came up with over 14,000 different options. So they ultimately reduced that in their report to 9 options in their recommendations for government. And it really was an interesting exercise. It was a participatory modeling exercise. There were people from the forest industry involved, people from government involved. Roberta Clowater and David Kuhn were both involved when David was working at the Conservation Council. So the intent was to represent a bunch of stakeholder interests and basically show people how that modeling exercise works. So it doesn't just seem like sort of a black box exercise that the government could manipulate. So, tellingly, we used to call an exercise like that wood supply modeling because the idea was, wood supply was the goal or the objective function of the model. Tom was really good at basically saying, well, that's not true, actually. You could have habitat, you could have all kinds, you could have old forest, you could have just about anything be your objective function. But when you choose one objective function, everything else in the model is a bit of a constraint on that. Or you optimize across a whole bunch of different values. When Tom retired and we advertised for his position, we called it forest estate modeling, which I think is an attempt to acknowledge that there's other values other than, wood for fiber in that mix. A lot of people, I think, who might have applied for the job didn't understand that term forest estate modeling. But interestingly, we sort of did this exercise, and again, not me personally, but people in the government and at UNB as well went on doing this sort of modeling the future forest exercise for quite a long time before climate change really became an important factor in what the future forest might look like. Anthony Taylor took over Tom Ertle's position now, and he has 10 years of work plus explicitly factoring climate change into those future predictions and models of the forest. So I think we're on the right track there. So the New Brunswick forest could be a lot of things. Well, what are the things it could be? The degree to which we're willing to engineer the forest, and I would argue that New Brunswick has a highly engineered forest. We can really shape the future depending upon what we plant, how we plant it, where we plant things, what percentage we let regenerate naturally, what we thin for, if we spray. Essentially, we can create a recipe that we favor in terms of species composition. Also, how old we let the forest grow. We're not unlimited in our ability to shape the future forest, soil, moisture regimes. These factors are also going to limit what we can possibly do. But we have like I said, we have a fairly engineered forestry sector here. Okay, now the fun stuff. What New Brunswick forests should be. I started saying I'm not going to make pronouncements on this topic. It's not for me to say. I'm just one citizen. I guess I have the right to have a say as one citizen. But I snuck a few things in at the very end. Marion Clausen was a economist at Oregon State, I believe, in the 1970s. And I love the title of this book. It's so parsimonious. Forests for whom and for what? The government answered part one of that question in their 2023 report. Our forests are for everyone. So that answers the for whom question, but the for what question is still an open question. Now, as soon as you get into the domain of should, you're not in the domain of science anymore. Maybe the domain of social science. But again, for a sociologist, this is where things get interesting. I just dragged these images off the internet. And, you start to get bold fonts, exclamation marks. On the left-hand picture, I don't know what's going on the left-hand side of that. It doesn't look very special to me. But the right-hand side is clearly a monoculture. Same with the right-hand picture. Mono is in scary big red letters, and diverse. There's no coarse woody debris on the forest floor. It's all grassy. I'm not sure that that's what we're aiming for. But you could, its point is here, there's a little bit of emotion involved. So who are the players? This is an exercise we do in my second year class. I call it, creating a stakeholders or a rights holders map. So who are all the players that might be involved or have an interest or have a stake or have some rights in a determination for one portion of the land base? So we go through and like, are they organized or not organized representative groups? What kind of values do they have? What sort of relative power do they have? And then what are the things that they appeal to for legitimizing their right to be involved in the conversation? Forest ownership is an interesting factor too for determining the future forest and what it should be. So again, close to 50% is Crown land that is in timber licenses. About 18% is in what's called industrial freehold. So, private property owned with industrial owners. So it's fairly clear what that type of forest is likely to be. And then 30% in private woodlots, which range everything from a few acres to, a few thousand acres. But this question of who owns the forest, it's not totally determinate as to what might happen on a given land base. And the question isn't as clear as it once was. Mi'kmaq and Wolastoqey have land claims basically cover the entire territory of the province. And that, to me, that just underscores the notion that private property is a bit of a contested terrain and a contested term, and things could change in the future. And even where there are private property rights, there's still some leverage by society to make rules and laws about what you can and can't do on either private woodlots or industrial freehold. And I think society has a legitimate role in doing some of that. Now, this is another framework that I use in class. I kind of trick my students. We talk about economic, utilitarian, ecosystem function, or life support values, aesthetic and moral, spiritual. And on the first day, I give them an assignment and I ask them, what is the single best thing about forests? And unbeknownst to them, I take all of their responses, load them into a PowerPoint, and we go through them as a class and kind of categorize them. And you wouldn't believe how many people say the peace, the calm, the serenity, the quiet. Foresters and environmental students pretty much sing the same tune. This is the results from this year's tally, 15 to 14 over life support. Interestingly, foresters usually have more moral spiritual values tallies than, and environmental students have that life support or ecosystem function. But this is previous year's results. I haven't tallied the last couple of years yet, but I do want to write a paper from this data. Almost every year, moral spiritual values win, and they win by a reasonably strong margin. I did calculate 10 years of data and had a couple of other coders help me. And you can see 50%, again, this is forestry and environmental management students, 50% identify moral, spiritual as the most important value or the single best thing about forests. So yes, it is a trick question. I play around with that and I admit to that to the students. I don't say what's the most important thing. I say what's the single best thing. But it's an instructive, it kicks off an instructive conversation about what we should be managing forests for, what should be driving our management objectives, and do we explicitly manage for moral and spiritual values ever? Okay, another one about the possibility. This slide is from a lecture that Chris Ward, ADM, gave in my class a couple of years ago. The upper part shows the amount of silviculture that was going on in the aftermath of the great logging boom of the 1990s. And basically, and again, on like a 35-year time horizon, a whole bunch of new fiber is going to become available very, very soon, like in the next few years. So question is, how much is enough? So again, back to what the forest should be. like I strongly believe that there should be a constant conversation about that question: forests for whom and for what, which values, what type of values, um, which stakeholders and which right holders should be, is everybody on equal footing, or do we need to come up with structures to weight certain interests over others? I mean, certainly there are different weights of interest over others currently. We had a really in-depth data-informed public conversation about this from 2005 to 2009. Huge changes were made. Many people will remember in 2014, an increase in 20% of the AAC from Crown land with little to no conversation. And again, the system hasn't changed much from then. The silviculture subsidies that we have, both on Crown and private woodlots, still favor a particular version of the forest, which is softwood dominated and meant to be an economic driver. Okay, switching gears just a little bit. What are we doing on our woodlot? So this gives you a window into what I feel like we should be, or at least what my partner and I should be doing on our little piece of forest. And so this is what we're trying to do. We're diversifying monoculture stands, trying to create more diverse age classes. Not do any clear cutting or cut any big patches anywhere, maybe small gaps for regeneration, but to ultimately grow an older forest and favor those species that do have greater longevity, and use the whole forest for a range of products, and then also share. So we're planting white pine. I'll never see the one as like the one on the right-hand side, which we call the great grandmother tree. Also red spruce. I'm planting a lot of oaks. That picture in the middle is actually my brother's woodlot in eastern Maine, where you can see all the coarse woody debris on the ground. It used to be a balsam fir dominant forest with the oak understory. And I didn't have any oak on my property, but I distributed about 6,000 acorns this fall, I believe. Some for the jays, some for the deer, and hopefully some will take root. We're trying to salvage what we can from the dying balsam fir, bought a portable sawmill, and I'm changing my attitudes. I used to have no time for red maple, but I'm accepting that the reboot has begun. Red maple is now my friend. And, to sort of make myself feel better about the image in the bottom right there, I sometimes tell people that my management objectives are woodpecker habitat and creating new soil. It just kind of makes me feel less bad about the state of my forest. We use the whole forest for a whole range of values. So we forage, we make maple sugar. Like, forests are just fantastic in all the bounty that they produce us. And we also share the bounty. So I've always offered hunting chances to former students, and they, in their appreciation for that, offer us venison back. And just last fall, I offered the black ash that we have to my friends at WNNB. So, final thoughts. I'm conscious of the time here. Scaling up these sort of personal actions to personal preferences for the whole forest. And again, these are just one person's view. I would love to see older forests in New Brunswick to truly let more of our forests reach maturity. I think more diversity will lead to greater resilience, and in an increasingly risky world, I think all of these things are just good risk management strategies. The thing too that I think is interesting is, like, except for fiber production through clear cutting, almost all of those other values kind of stack. You can have forests that produce non-timber products, carbon, recreation, habitat, spiritual values, maintain ecosystem function, and produce revenue all at the same time. The only silviculture system that really doesn't do that is clear cutting, where you have a big interruption for a long period of time. So my wish list for the future New Brunswick forest is innovative silviculture that produces diverse outcomes and values. Truly, I think clear cutting is the bluntest of blunt instruments. Silviculture subsidies for growing more diverse and more old forests. I just reviewed a paper from Estonia where they described, in an area that's half the size of New Brunswick, they spend twice as much on silviculture subsidies, and they subsidize conservation forests as well as production forests. Let's make sure our protected areas remain protected. A la the news story that came out yesterday and the discussion around how protected are our protected areas. And then again, like as a sociologist, I really feel like that meaningful public engagement, like this should not be something that we do once every 10 years or once every 20 years. It should be continuous. And if you want a model for what I think our forest should be, just take a walk in Odell Park. It is spectacular.